Hi, my name is Natani, and this is a story about how I became interested in becoming a trauma counselor. I just turned 22 years old, and I have grew up in Surprise, Arizona my entire life. And when I was younger, I had trouble making friends. Number one, because I was really shy, and my older sister would always talk to people for me, so I had trouble with communication. And because I was a gymnast and I spent most of my childhood in the gym. So then I ended up quitting so I can focus more on school and making friends because when you're a gymnast, you have no time for anything, just, for homework, barely any time for homework. So it was a great decision I made. Even though I missed it, I'm glad I did because I was able to focus more on school and, of course, trying to make friends. And once I reached high school, I had tons of friends, and, life was very easy. And when I was in high school, I got to take my first psychology class. And after that, I fell in love with psychology and the study of it. And going through high school, I had a lot of friends that came from not so great families and went through a lot of trauma in their life and had a lot of issues. And I noticed that they would always gravitate towards me and ask me for help and felt comfortable sitting down and talking to me about their issues. And after that, I thought, I love psychology and, I'm good at helping my friends. Why not become a counselor? And then I graduated high school and, of course, went on to college to major in psychology. Academically, my education experiences have shaped me because ever since going to college, I started to love school and actually put time into my education. Because when I was in high school, I did not take school seriously when it came to my education. I was just there to have fun and just to graduate and get my high school diploma. I wish I took that a little more seriously because I could have done more with like getting into a good school, but I am also grateful that I got to experience community college and end up at Ottawa University even before my sophomore year. Once I got to college, I was able to learn about what I wanted to learn about and focus on that subject and thrive in school. Because once I started taking psychology classes, I took it super seriously because that's what I'm going to do later on in life. And it was never hard or felt like work to me because I loved what I was learning. I actually ended up taking the time to do my work and study and actually learn something and apply it. And my teachers also helped shape me in my education because I was able to build a relationship with them and have someone to look up to when it was relating to my major. And I feel like that's very important because it's certain connections you're able to have. Connections are important because you're going to need that in your career. So it's important to build relationships with your teachers that have experience in what you want to do. And I got to learn about different careers that I could do in psychology, and I am a very indecisive person. Therefore, I was constantly changing what I wanted to do with my career and where I wanted to take it. The classes that made me change my mind were my addictions class with you, Dr. Sherlin, and then marriage and family with Dr. Thompson. And taking these classes, it ended up making me torn between working with addiction, substances, and then marriage and family, or just anything to do with trauma in general because I'm very interested in it. Aside from academics, my education at Ottawa shaped me because I was able to join different sports and different clubs, and I was able to cheer and be captain of the cheer team, learn about discipline, learn about being on time, turning in my stuff on time, just like I would do in class. I was able to be a part of the Psi Chi Honor Society, which was cool because one time we had a speaker come in and talk about her career, and I'm very interested in that, so I can see what I'll be doing later on in the future. I was able to be vice president of the student body of student government, and I learned a lot from that because I also learned, how to listen to the students and what they need. And I was also able to work with marketing for the school, and I learned from that. Once again, I had meetings I had to be on time for, and I got to make different videos for the school and just be very involved. And I feel like when you're very involved in college, aside from academics, you get to learn more about yourself and shape the new person you're going to be as you're growing up. I will take all the knowledge that I learned and put it into the world because I feel like with the world being the way it is, we need counselors, and a lot of people go through trauma and a lot of tough times. And I feel like even without my education, I learned how to talk to people and take care of them through the experiences that they had throughout their life. And to me, life experiences are just as important as the education you learn. And being a counselor is so important to me because I want to make a difference in the world, and that's what counselors do. People focus more on other medical professionals sometimes when it comes to helping people. And of course, they're very, very important, but so are counselors and everything that they do. And I also want to be that person that makes a difference in somebody's life. Trauma in people's lives need to be taken more seriously than they are. So I found some articles that have to deal with trauma counseling, and I found an interesting one, and it's the use of mindfulness in trauma. Using mindfulness in trauma counseling gives the client experienced trauma a sense of self-control and connection, and it helps reduce anxiety and depression as well. And when using mindfulness, the counselor concentrates on helping a client make a judgment of thoughts and put them in a certain setting. And that's an important part of a recovery process for somebody that is going through trauma in their life. I also found this article very interesting because it talks about using mindfulness and using yoga and practice of meditation as well to calm your mind and help reduce anxiety and forget about the trauma that you went through. And I love to do yoga and I love to meditate, so I feel like this would be a very cool way to, put a twist on trauma counseling and helping people. Next article that I found interesting talks about the use of feminism in counseling, and I feel like this is important because women do face a lot of trauma, especially when it comes to being raped, and just being a woman in general is hard at times because they have to live by society's standards. And I feel like this is a great idea because of the issues that women face economically and career related, and these problems aren't talked about enough. And oftentimes, whenever people hear the word feminism, they tend to shy away from the word when the word should be used more. Feminism and being a feminist is a very uncomfortable topic for most people, but I feel like it should be normalized and used in people's practices because women's problems are just as important and the trauma that they have to face. This brings me into my next article, which is counseling the traumatized victims. So it's counseling those that have been raped, and I feel like this is important because it's a very traumatizing thing for somebody to go through because, sometimes people don't believe them and they feel humiliated that it happened. So it's important to know how to counsel people through these types of issues. I also found this next article interesting because it talks about trauma in the family, and it basically talks about how if one person in the family is going through something, it could mess up the whole family dynamic, and that's something that people don't really pay attention to. It's important that counselors think about that information. Another article that I think is important is called Shared Trauma and Counseling, and it basically explains that the client and the counselor themselves could be going through the same thing, or the counselor might have went through it at some point in their life, which it makes it easier for the counselor to help the client in that way. I think this is very helpful because if you weren't able to help your client, it could affect them very negatively, and it could be dangerous to their health and their life. This next article talks about the ethics in counseling, which is super, super important because if you don't follow the ethical guidelines, then you could end up losing your job or making a client feel uncomfortable. Basically, if you're not being ethical in your practice of counseling, any outcome to that would be negative. This next article discusses childhood sexual abuse survivors undergoing cancer treatment, and this is a case for trauma-enforced integrated care. And this article basically talks about people that had to go through sexual abuse as a child and also has to undergo cancer treatment. This is upsetting because they had to go through so much trauma in their life and had to add on more to it by having cancer. And since they've had previous trauma, it affects their health in a negative way, which also is not fair to them. This is important because it really shows how counselors really need to look at the background of all of their clients to make sure all their information is accurate. Another article that I found talks about the dilemmas in school counseling, but I found this interesting because I don't really see any dilemmas within school counseling because I feel like it's important for students at school to have somebody to talk to, and some parents can't always afford a counselor for their child, so it's always a great alternative. And school counselors are also important because they're able to help someone's child in their personal life as well as their school lives. Another article I found is called Identifying and Treating Race-Based Trauma in Counseling. And a lot of people can get trauma because people are racist towards them and causes psychological problems for victims involved. And people are very hateful and taught racism from an early age. So if no one teaches them that racism is wrong, it can end up hurting people, and the victim will end up having problems for the rest of their lives. This article talks about how racism can cause stress, anxiety, and fear within those people's lives. And when counseling someone who has trauma from racism, there are certain methods to follow in order to help work with them through their trauma. The last article I found is called Trauma Counseling and Interventions, and it's an introduction to the special issue. And this basically talks about trauma counseling and interventions and the historical knowledge of trauma counseling, which is very important for me to read because that's what I want to do. And when you know the history behind something, it means you have more knowledge of it. All the research that I used for my project will be able to help me with my career later on in life. It taught me what I can do differently and what I can add to my practices when I counsel people. So this is who I am, how my education experiences have shaped me, and how I will bring all this knowledge that I've learned over the past years of my life and put it out into the real world.